Hi, I wanted to make this video because I've been thinking, and this time I've been thinking about strangers. So the reason I've been thinking about strangers is because I'm not sure how I feel about them. Are they friends I haven't met yet, or are they a danger to stay away from? If a stranger tries to talk to me, should I join in, or should I try to get away? Should I try to talk to a stranger? Is it a complicated subject or am I just overthinking it? It seemed like a good one to dig into a bit more. So, to see if I can find any evidence to help me decide and to see if anyone else can relate to it. So I think we often teach our children from a young age to have a fear of strangers. And I've even heard adults telling their children that a stranger might try to steal them away from their family. I do understand what they're trying to achieve by saying that, but maybe we're accidentally instilling too much fear of strangers, to the point where it might be damaging. I think we're also still feeling the impact of the pandemic from a few years ago, when the idea was driven into us that it was dangerous to get too close to a stranger. Um, and we were being spread out to a safe distance, a bit like cars. So with all those confusing messages, what's the real situation? Should I be viewing strangers as a threat or not? So if you've seen my previous video about social anxiety, you'll know that I have a bit of a fear of talking to people that I don't already know. So I don't think that comes from being taught to fear strangers as a child, but it's probably more to do with not knowing what a stranger might expect from me, whether they might talk to me in a way that makes me feel uncomfortable, or unable to get away. So for me, it's often safer to avoid speaking to people that I don't already know. I do realise, though, that creates a bit of a problem for me because I actually love connecting with other people. And if I don't speak to strangers, how will I ever get to know anyone? So one of the safe ways that I enjoy connecting with strangers is waving to them. I love waving. But don't worry, I don't just go around randomly waving to people in the street. But I do really enjoy being in situations where waving is acceptable or even encouraged. Boats seem to be good for that, or other unusual methods of transport like open-top buses or steam trains. I'll be the first one to be waving, and I get really excited when people wave back. I actually went to a town recently in the UK where they had a thing called a portal. It was basically a live webcam to other places around the world that also have a portal, and we were able to wave to each other. And I had great fun waving to strangers around the world. It was lovely. So just in case anyone watching also likes waving, hello, have a wave from me. So waving, it tends to be a nice and safe, interaction because it's from a distance. It doesn't have any real interaction, or give me any cause to overthink it afterwards. But that's not quite the same for real interactions, which can be a bit more complicated. Real interactions with strangers can cause me a bit of anxiety, and lead to overthinking afterwards. So knowing that can make me want to avoid them, and just stick to the waving. But real interactions can be much more rewarding. So should I try to work on being as light and breezy about those types of interaction as I am about the waving? Or would that be dangerous? So maybe if I share some of my experiences, it might help me to be able to answer that. So I live in a city. I go for a walk every day, often on my own, and that's when most of my encounters with strangers happen. I walk the same route most days, so I see familiar strangers and also complete strangers. I imagine a lot of the people I see are on their way to work, but mostly I work from home, so I'm walking just for the walk, maybe to buy a coffee or some food for dinner. So I try to remember to slow down a bit and, enjoy what's going on around me. I also do quite a lot of my thinking when I'm walking, but I guess that's not relevant. Anyway, I did used to be a bit of a sort of head down and sunglasses on kind of person, but I decided it's better not to do that. I'm going out to get sunlight, so I shouldn't be blocking it out. And I want to see real people before I get back to my desk for the rest of the day. So I need to look up and, actually pay attention to what's going on around me. So I made the decision earlier this year to stop wearing sunglasses when I go for my walks, even when it's really sunny, and to keep my head up. And, I think it's really had an impact on how much interaction I have with strangers. I actually feel braver without the sunglasses because I know I'm not hiding. So I try to make a point of looking at people and giving them a smile. I sometimes even say hello. Some people don't look or smile back, but most people seem to enjoy that small gesture and smile back. So far, I don't think it's ever led to a conversation with a stranger, but it does make me feel more part of the community. So, that's nice. And I actually remember someone at work telling me that they met their husband just by smiling and saying hello as they cross paths in the mornings. So I guess you never know where that friendly gesture might lead. Not that I'm looking for a husband, but if you are. So I've been trying to be less cautious in my approach to strangers. And so far that's been working out okay. I've been trying to be a nice stranger. So I've been making more effort to hold doors open for other people and to say more than just thank you, when someone's serving me in a shop. It does take a bit of courage sometimes, but I can't test out if it's safe if I don't try. Sometimes I do notice people acting towards strangers in a way that makes me feel uncomfortable. Like carrying on with a phone conversation when they're being served by someone, or maybe being rude or aggressive in the way that they're speaking. So I can't stop people from doing that, but I try to imagine what it must feel like to be the person on the receiving end, and that's why it makes me feel uncomfortable. So whenever I can, I sort of try to undo that a bit by making a bit of extra effort to be nice to the person who's serving. So maybe it's just a habit that needs to be broken, and I think it's important that we don't start to become okay or even immune to things like that. Being respectful to other people doesn't cost anything, and hopefully, we'll encourage other people to do the same. But even when I see those things, I try not to think badly of other people because you never know what someone else might be going through, and thinking negatively about them will only probably do more damage to you than to them. Maybe that phone call was important and, maybe they're just having a bad day and they wouldn't act like that normally. I just prefer to view it like that. Although I have had one or two unpleasant encounters myself with strangers, but not really enough to change my opinion on that. So one of those unpleasant encounters was a couple of weeks ago, when a young lad was cycling towards me and was staring at me. So I gave him what I thought was a nice smile, and then he shouted, "Why are you so ugly?" as he went past me on his bike. So my first reaction was to laugh, actually, but maybe that's just because I was a bit shocked. I tried not to dwell on it too much afterwards, but I did wonder what might drive someone to shout an insult at a stranger, and one that was smiling at them. I thought maybe I'd given him one of those smiles that accidentally goes wrong, but I don't think so. I did check in the mirror when I got home, but I looked the same as I usually do, so I tried to shrug it off. But, I guess the fact that I'm mentioning it here, means it must have had a bit of an impact on me. But I do try not to dwell on negative things, and I'm sure he forgot all about it afterwards. Anyway, maybe someone was looking out for me, because in a strange twist of fate, a couple of days later, I had another random comment from a stranger in the street. And this time they said that I was looking great today. So that one was definitely nicer, but equally as random, because they don't know what I look like on any of the other days. But it did cheer me up, and it helped to balance out the other comments, so that was nice. So when I think of some of my nicer interactions, apart from that one, they do seem to either be in shops, when I'm buying something and decide to start a conversation, or in the street, when I'm coming to someone's rescue. So I've never really thought of myself as someone who comes to the rescue, but when I was trying to think of examples to talk about in this video, there's been quite a lot coming to mind. So last week I helped a partially sighted lady to cross the road when the crossing lights weren't working. We got chatting, and I ended up walking with her all the way to the hospital, because I didn't want to leave not knowing if she'd got there okay. And she told me about how her family tell her off for not taking her white stick out with her, but she likes to think that she can manage without it. She'd come on the bus on her own, for that appointment, and I thought what a brave lady she was. And I thought about her afterwards, and what a nice interaction it was, and that I hoped that she got home okay, and maybe took her white stick with her next time. She could have managed without me, but I think we both had a nicer experience because I stopped to help. A couple of weeks earlier, I saw a lady laying in the street after a fall. So I went over to help her, and with a few other people, we got her back on her feet, and we stayed with her until she felt a bit better. There were several nice people I spoke to on that day, and I thought about all of them afterwards. And, I was glad to not be the only person that tried to help, so I was grateful to them for coming over. And I feel like we all made a difference to that lady, and hopefully, turned something unpleasant into something positive, so that she maybe doesn't lose confidence in going out on her own in the future. I did have another incident with an elderly lady. There wasn't much conversation that time, but I still thought about it quite a lot afterwards, because I'd been in exactly the right place at the right time to help her. And she was walking towards me, and she looked quite unsteady on her feet. She did have a walking stick, but she was leaning to the side and looked like she might fall over. So I started walking more quickly towards her because I was worried, and I just reached her as she toppled over, and I managed to catch her and keep her on her feet. And she was quite elderly and frail, so I think she would have been really hurt if she'd fallen to the ground. And she was on her own, so I helped her to the bus stop, and I stayed with her until someone came to collect her. So I don't know what happened to her afterwards, and I kept thinking about what could have happened if I hadn't got there in time. So she definitely needed the help of a stranger that day, and I'm glad that I was there. So when I think back to those interactions, I feel a bit sad that I won't get to see those people again or find out what happened next in their stories. So does that mean that I should try harder to keep in touch with my strangers? I can't really imagine doing that. Do other people do that? Perhaps I should just learn to let it go afterwards, and just accept that it was just meant to be a fleeting connection. So if I think about whether I was in danger during any of those interactions, I think the answer's no. In fact, it's more like the other way around. The other people might have been in danger if there were no strangers to get involved. So even with the more unpleasant interactions, I never really felt in danger. But I do think I've got quite a good instinct for people, and a good radar for danger. So I like to think that I would know when not to get involved. In fact, now that I think about it, I do see quite a lot of things on my walks that I do steer clear of, and I've probably just got used to that. Even this morning on my walk, I saw some people shouting at each other, so I crossed the street to avoid it. I do sometimes feel a bit guilty, but I think probably every city has some social problems that are a bit too complicated for a passerby to be able to help with. So I do steer away from those in general. So even taking that into account, I think I've proved to myself that as long as I use my instinct, I'm not putting myself in danger by interacting with strangers. And actually, the interactions with strangers are often a highlight in my day, and maybe theirs too. I've also seen that sometimes, a stranger is all you have and exactly what you need. So, none of us know when we might need the help of a stranger. So maybe if we're all a bit friendlier to strangers, we'll never get to a stage where nobody wants to step in and help someone that they don't know. And I think we do need to be aware that there can be dangers with people we don't know. But from my experience, if I use my instinct, I shouldn't need to be afraid. So I don't need to use that as a reason not to be open and friendly with strangers. I also wasn't troubled by social anxiety with any of those interactions. So I think I can afford to not be afraid of that either. So I'm pleased to have spent some time thinking it through, and I'm feeling confident that my approach is right for me. So I'm going to carry on smiling at strangers, holding doors open, and trying to help if someone's in difficulty. My walks are more interesting and more likely to give me a good feeling to carry with me for the rest of the day. So, getting back to the original question, are strangers friends I haven't met yet, or a danger to stay away from? Well, I think from my experience, it isn't quite either of those, but it's closer to the first one. I don't have any new friends yet from my interactions with strangers, but I do have some nice memories and, something to feel good about. So I'm planning to carry on being a friendly stranger, and maybe I'll try to treat the real interactions in a similar way to the waving and just enjoy it for what it is and be glad of the interaction. So I hope you took something useful from this video, but I think that's all for this time. Thanks for watching and hope to see you next time.